At my father's funeral, my aunt laughed. "Poor Maya, still trying to act like she matters." My uncle said, "Her father died a crook with nothing." My cousins whispered about my pitiful family, mocking my shoes and tears. Even my mother stayed quiet. Then 3 black SUVs pulled up. Men in suits stepped out, bowed, and said, "Miss Maya, the Dawn is waiting." "Did you see her shoes?" "Goodwill Special." My cousin Jasmine's stage whisper cut through the October wind while my father's casket sat beside the grave. She wanted me to hear. She always wanted me to hear. And she's crying like her father was someone important. Jasmine continued instead of the neighborhood embarrassment he actually was. "Before we continue, I want to thank you for being here to witness Maya's journey. If you believe families should protect each other, not tear each other down, please consider subscribing. It's free and helps us share more stories like this. Now let's see what happens next." Terrell snorted his agreement. Aunt Patricia smiled. Uncle Kenneth nodded like Jasmine had said something profound instead of something cruel. I kept my eyes on Dad's casket, the modest one. Mom and I had scraped together money to afford. The one Uncle Kenneth had already called pathetic, loud enough for the whole cemetery to hear. Mom stood beside me in silence, not defending Dad, not defending me, just standing there like she'd stood at every family gathering for 23 years while her family tore us apart. "Her father died a crook with nothing to his name," Uncle Kenneth announced to anyone still listening. "Criminal families breed criminal children." That's when I heard the engines. 3 black SUVs rolled through the cemetery gates with synchronized precision. 6 men in expensive suits emerged. The lead man, silver-haired, dangerous, unmistakably powerful, walked directly to me. He took my hand gently and bowed like I was royalty. "Miss Maya, the Dawn has been waiting to meet you. Your father spoke of you every day. Vincent Chambers. Everyone in our city knows that name." My aunt made a choking sound. My uncle's face went gray. They just spent my father's funeral calling him a nobody, mocking my tears, laughing at my shoes. They had no idea who they'd actually been dealing with. The cemetery had gone completely silent. Even the wind seemed to pause, waiting to see what would happen next. The priest, who'd been edging toward his car, stopped mid-step. The handful of mourners who'd been drifting away froze in place. Vincent Chambers still held my hand, his grip gentle but somehow commanding. Up close, I could see the fine lines around his eyes, the silver threading through his dark hair, the small scar on his left cheekbone that suggested a history of violence survived rather than avoided. Behind him, the 5 other men stood in formation, not threatening exactly, but radiating the kind of controlled power that made it clear they could become threatening in an instant if the situation required it. One of them held an enormous floral arrangement, white roses and lilies assembled into something that belonged at a state funeral. Not in this modest cemetery beside the simple bouquets Mom and I had chosen. "I apologize for the interruption," Vincent said, turning slightly to address the gathered mourners. His voice was pleasant, almost warm, but something underneath made my survival instincts whisper warnings. "But Miss Maya has matters to attend to. Her father's true family would like to pay their respects." The emphasis on true family wasn't subtle. Neither was the way his gaze swept across Aunt Patricia, Uncle Kenneth, and my cousins before dismissing them as irrelevant. The man holding the massive floral arrangement stepped forward and placed it carefully beside Dad's grave. It dwarfed everything else there. A statement written in flowers that said, "This man mattered. This man was loved. This man was powerful enough that his death brings men like us to pay respects." "Miss Maya," Vincent said, his attention returning to me, "when you're ready, the Dawn is waiting to meet you." He would have come himself, but he paused delicately. "There are reasons your father kept certain aspects of his life separate from you." The Dawn respected those boundaries. But now that Jerome has passed, there are things you need to understand about your heritage. My heritage? The word hung in the air like a question I didn't know how to ask. I looked at my mother one last time. She was staring at Vincent with an expression I'd never seen before. Terror and recognition mixed together in equal parts. Not surprise, not confusion. Recognition. Mom. My voice came out steadier than I expected, considering my entire world had just tilted sideways. She met my eyes briefly, then looked away. When she spoke, her voice was barely a whisper, but it carried in the silent cemetery. Go with them, Maya. Your father. He would have wanted this. The words confirmed something I'd been suspecting since the SUVs arrived. Mom had known something all along. Maybe not everything, but enough to recognize that men in expensive suits bowing to her daughter at a funeral weren't here by accident. She'd known Dad had secrets, connections, a life beyond the modest insurance salesman routine he'd maintained for 23 years. And she'd still stood silent while her family spent his funeral calling him a crook with nothing. Still said nothing while they mocked my tears in my shoes. Still chose their approval over our dignity, even knowing there was more to the story than they understood. The betrayal of that silence hurt worse than anything Patricia or Kenneth had said. I turned back to Vincent. I'll come with you. His expression warmed slightly. Approval may be your respect. He extended his arm toward the lead SUV, a gesture that was somehow both courtly and commanding. As I took his arm, Aunt Patricia's voice rose behind us, shrill with panic. Denise, what is happening? Who are these people? What was Jerome actually involved in? I didn't look back. Couldn't look back. If I looked at Mom's face right now, I might say something I couldn't take back. Or worse, I might cry. And I refused to give my mother's family the satisfaction of seeing me break. Vincent guided me toward the SUV with careful courtesy, like I was something precious that needed protecting. One of his men opened the back door. The interior was more luxurious than any vehicle I'd ever been inside. Leather seats that probably cost more than my college tuition, polished wood trim, an atmosphere of controlled power that made the space feel simultaneously safe and dangerous. Vincent settled into the seat across from me. The door closed with the solid sound of German engineering, sealing us into silence. While outside, my mother's family descended into chaos. Through the tinted window, I could see Aunt Patricia grabbing Mom's arm, her mouth moving frantically. Uncle Kenneth was staring at the SUVs like he just realized he'd made a terrible mistake. Jasmine and Terrell stood frozen, their earlier mockery replaced by something that looked like fear. The SUV began moving smooth and quiet. The cemetery fell away behind us. I know you have questions, Vincent said gently. His voice had softened now that we were away from the cemetery, away from the performance he'd been giving for my mother's family. And you deserve answers. But first, I need you to understand something important about your father. I waited, my hands clenched in my lap, still wearing the discount store shoes Jasmine had mocked. Jerome Washington was Mr. Sterling's nephew, Vincent said carefully, watching my reaction. His mother, your grandmother, was the old man's younger sister. Your father wasn't just connected to the Washington family, he was family, blood family. And in our world, blood is everything. The words didn't make sense at first. Mr. Sterling. The name echoed in my head, bouncing off everything I thought I knew about my father. Jerome Washington, quiet insurance salesman who drove a 15-year-old Honda, clipped coupons, and lived in a modest 2-bedroom house in Detroit. The same Jerome Washington who'd raised me to value education over material things. Kindness over power, quiet dignity over loud displays. That Jerome Washington was supposedly connected to Thomas Sterling, the name that appeared in Detroit newspapers with alarming frequency. The man whose business empire spanned from real estate to restaurants to industries the papers only hinted at in carefully worded articles. I must have looked as confused as I felt, because Vincent's expression softened. Your father left Detroit when he was 19, he explained. He wanted a different life, away from the family business, the expectations, the obligations that come with the Sterling name. Mr. Sterling respected that choice, but blood is blood. They stayed in contact. Your father built his own life, his own identity. He became the man you knew, the good man who raised you right. Outside the tinted windows, Detroit streets passed by. Familiar, but suddenly strange. We were heading toward Jefferson Avenue, toward the waterfront developments where I'd never had reason to go. The buildings got taller, shinier, more expensive with each block. Did he live a double life? I asked. My voice sounded small in that luxurious car. No, Vincent said firmly. He lived the life he chose, the life he wanted. Your father really was an insurance salesman. He really did drive that old Honda. He really did clip coupons and budget carefully. But he paused, choosing his words with obvious care. He also stayed connected to his family. He attended certain events, offered counsel when asked, maintained relationships, and he made arrangements, contingencies, provisions for you in case something happened to him. The SUV pulled into an underground parking garage beneath a gleaming tower I'd passed countless times without giving it a second thought. The Sterling Building, according to the discreet signage. Of course it was. We took a private elevator that required a key card to access. Vincent inserted the card without comment. The elevator rose smoothly, silently, numbers climbing past floors I hadn't realized the building had. It stopped at the penthouse level. The doors opened directly into an apartment that occupied the entire top floor. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of Detroit, from the river to downtown to neighborhoods stretching in every direction. The furnishings were elegant without being ostentatious. Art on the walls that looked original and expensive. Books on the shelves that appeared actually read rather than decorative. This had been a home, not just a showpiece. Mr. Sterling is in his study, Vincent said, gesturing toward a hallway lined with family photographs. Take your time. He'll wait. I walked slowly down that hallway, studying the photographs like they held answers to questions I didn't know how to ask. There were pictures I recognized. My father as a young man, maybe 18 or 19, standing with an older couple I'd never met. My grandparents, presumably, the ones who died before I was born, or so I'd been told. More pictures of Dad, older now, at various ages. Always well-dressed in these photos, always confident in a way that didn't quite match the modest man I'd known. And then pictures that made my breath catch. Me. Baby pictures I'd seen in Mom's albums. But these were different copies, displayed here in silver frames. School photos from kindergarten through high school, my college graduation. Dad beaming beside me in that photo, wearing the same suit he'd worn to every important event. Pictures I'd never known existed. Me at my high school track meets, at the science fair where I'd placed third, and my part-time job at the library. Someone had been watching, documenting, caring enough to capture these moments. Someone who wasn't the man I'd called Dad. At the end of the hallway, a door stood slightly ajar. I pushed it open carefully. The study was exactly what you'd expect from a man of power and influence. Massive desk, leather chairs, more books, a computer system that probably cost more than my entire apartment. And in a wheelchair beside the window, looking out over the city, sat a man who had to be in his 80s but still radiated authority like heat from a furnace. He turned when he heard me enter. The family resemblance was unmistakable. I saw my father's eyes in his face, my father's jawline, my father's way of holding himself even sitting down. Maya, he said, and his voice was rough with age and emotion. Come here, child, let me look at you. I crossed the room on shaking legs. Up close, I could see the evidence of recent illness, weight loss, the pallor of someone who'd been hospital-bound, the oxygen line running to his nose. But his eyes were sharp, assessing me with an intelligence that age hadn't dimmed. You look like your grandmother, he said finally. Jerome's mother. She had that same fire in her eyes, that same steel in her spine. You're going to need both. Before we continue, I need to address something, he continued, his gaze steady on mine. I know this is overwhelming. I know you just buried your father, and now you're here, learning that everything you thought you knew might be incomplete. But I need you to understand something crucial. Jerome was my nephew, my blood. When his mother, my sister, passed away, I raised him like he was my own son. He was brilliant, talented, had a mind for business that could have taken the Sterling Empire to levels I only dreamed of. But he wanted something different. He wanted a quiet life, a simple life, away from the complexity and danger that comes with our world. I respected that. Thomas Sterling paused, reaching for a glass of water on the table beside him. His hands shook slightly, but his voice remained firm when he continued. Your father built the life he wanted. Met your mother, fell in love, had you? He worked his insurance job, lived in that house in the suburbs, raised you to be independent and strong. But he never forgot where he came from, never forgot his family. We stayed close in ways that didn't interfere with the life he'd chosen. And he made me promise something, Mr. Sterling continued. If anything happened to him, I was to make sure you were protected, provided for, and given the choice he had. The choice to walk away or the choice to embrace your heritage. Both paths are valid, Maya. Both are worthy. The question is, which one is yours? I found my voice finally. What exactly did my father leave me? Mr. Sterling smiled slightly. Direct. Good. Jerome always said you didn't waste time on nonsense. He wheeled his chair to the desk and pressed a button. A screen descended from the ceiling, displaying what looked like a legal document. Your father's personal wealth accumulated over 25 years of careful investment and business ventures I helped him manage comes to approximately $42 million. The number hit me like a physical blow. $42 million. The man who'd clipped coupons and driven a 15-year-old Honda had $42 million. Additionally, Mr. Sterling continued, as if he hadn't just dropped a financial bomb that could crater my understanding of reality. Jerome owned controlling interest in several properties in Detroit, apartment buildings, commercial real estate, a restaurant he particularly loved, all managed through trusts and holding companies that kept his name separate from the Sterling business empire. All now transferred to you. The screen changed, showing property after property, buildings I'd walked past, restaurants I'd eaten at, developments I'd never have guessed my coupon-clipping father had any connection to. And finally, Mr. Sterling said, there's this. Another screen change, this time showing this apartment, this building, the Sterling building itself. Jerome owned 30% of this property. I own 40%. The remaining 30% is divided among other family members. Your father's share is now yours, making you the second largest shareholder in one of Detroit's premium downtown properties. I sat down heavily in one of the leather chairs. The room spun slightly. This can't be real. I have student loans. I work retail. I shop at thrift stores. Mr. Sterling's expression turned gentle. Your father wanted you to understand the value of money by not having unlimited access to it. He wanted you to work, to struggle a little, to appreciate what you earned. He believed, and I agreed, that giving you everything would have robbed you of essential character development. But now he's gone. And now you need to understand the full picture of your inheritance, not just the money, but the responsibility that comes with it. He wheeled closer, fixing me with that sharp gaze. The Sterling name carries weight in Detroit, Maya. It carries history, connections, obligations. Your father chose to step away from most of that, but he never fully left. He advised me on business matters. He helped mediate disputes. He contributed to family decisions in ways that kept him involved without being visible. Now that role could be yours if you want it, or you can take the money, the properties, and walk away. Build whatever life you choose. The choice is yours. A knock at the door interrupted us. Vincent entered carrying a folder. Sir, he said to Mr. Sterling, the others are asking about the reading of Jerome's will. They want to know when Miss Maya will be available. Let them wait, Mr. Sterling said dismissively. Maya needs time to process. They can manage their curiosity for a few more hours. Vincent nodded and retreated. Mr. Sterling turned back to me. You're probably wondering about the others, the family members who'll want to know who you are, what you mean to the Sterling legacy. Some will welcome you, some will see you as a threat. That's the nature of families with power and money. Everyone's calculating their position, their share, their influence. I thought about my mother's family at the funeral, the mockery, the cruelty, the years of being made to feel less than. I'd spent 23 years watching them operate from a position of assumed superiority, treating Dad and me like we were beneath them. What they didn't know, what they couldn't know, was that my father had more wealth in his modest portfolio than all of them combined, more power in his quiet connections than they'd accumulated in their loud, showy displays. I have questions, I said finally, hundreds of them. But I need to know, does my mother know about this? About the money, the properties, the Sterling connection? Mr. Sterling's expression flickered with something that might have been respect or sadness or both. Your mother knew Jerome came from wealth. She knew he'd walked away from it deliberately. She didn't know specific numbers or details, but she knew he maintained family connections. Jerome kept it vague to protect her, to let her have plausible deniability if questions ever arose. The anger I'd been holding since the funeral crystallized into something cold and sharp. She knew enough. She knew Dad wasn't the failure her family claimed. She knew there was more to the story, and she still stood silent while they destroyed him. I looked at Mr. Sterling directly, that steel spine he'd mentioned earlier straightening in my posture. I want to know everything. The businesses, the properties, the connections, all of it. And I want to understand exactly what obligations come with this inheritance. Because if I'm going to accept it, I'm going to do it with full knowledge, not stumbling around in the dark while everyone else knows the rules. Mr. Sterling's smile widened. You really are Jerome's daughter. He would be so proud. Over the next 4 hours, Vincent and Mr. Sterling walked me through an education in power, money, and family dynamics that would have made an MBA program look elementary. The Sterling organization, I learned, operated on multiple levels. Legitimate businesses, restaurants, real estate, import-export ventures that generated millions annually and employed hundreds of people across Detroit and beyond. Then there were the less legitimate operations, carefully structured, protected by layers of lawyers and shell companies, existing in gray areas that weren't quite illegal but definitely weren't simple. My father, despite his insurance salesman cover, had been instrumental in building the legitimate side. He'd advised on investments, helped develop business strategies, created the kind of financial structures that could withstand scrutiny from any regulatory agency. His genius, Vincent explained, was making everything look boring. Insurance policies, investment portfolios, property management, the kind of business so mundane that no one looked twice. But underneath that boring exterior was a financial empire that generated steady, reliable, legal income that could absorb and clean money from less legitimate sources. Money laundering, I said flatly, not as a question, but as a statement. Vincent didn't flinch, among other things. Your father specialized in making dirty money clean through legitimate investments. He never touched the criminal side directly, never involved himself in activities that could come back on you or your mother, but he provided essential financial services to the organization, services that Mr. Sterling and others relied on. The ethics of that sat heavy in my stomach. My father, the man who'd taught me right from wrong, honesty and integrity, had spent 25 years helping clean money for what amounted to organized crime. Mr. Sterling must have seen something in my expression because he leaned forward in his wheelchair. Jerome struggled with it too. He said quietly, every decision he made, every business move, he weighed against his principles. That's why he left in the first place, why he built a separate life. But family is family, Maya. Sometimes love means supporting people even when you don't agree with all their choices. And your father found ways to channel sterling money into legitimate, positive ventures. Community programs, scholarships, business development in neighborhoods that banks wouldn't touch. He used his position to push the family toward less criminal activity, more legitimate operations. It was a compromise, but it was his compromise, made with full awareness of the complexities. I thought about that, about my father living in two worlds, balancing loyalty to family against his own moral code. It wasn't the simple story I'd believed about the humble insurance salesman, but maybe it was more honest, more complicated and human and real. What happens now? I asked. With the businesses, the properties, the money, what does accepting this inheritance actually mean? Mr. Sterling and Vincent exchanged a glance. That's where it gets interesting, Vincent said, and potentially dangerous. He pulled up another screen showing what looked like a family tree. These are the active members of the Sterling organization, he explained. Thomas at the top, then his children, grandchildren, various cousins, an extended family. Each one has roles, responsibilities, shares in various businesses. Your father's death created a vacancy. 30% ownership in this building, controlling interest in several properties, voting rights in family business decisions. That vacancy needs to be filled. By me, I said, understanding dawning. If I accept the inheritance, I'm not just getting money. I'm getting a seat at the table, a voice in family decisions. Vincent nodded. You'd be one of the major stakeholders, not as powerful as Mr. Sterling, but significant enough that your opinions would matter, your votes would count. That's what they're worried about. That's why they want to meet you. They need to know who you are, what you want, whether you'll support their positions or oppose them. And if I refuse? I asked. If I just take the money and walk away? Mr. Sterling sighed. Then your shares would be redistributed according to your father's will. Family members would buy out your position at fair market value. You'd still be wealthy, still be set for life, but you'd lose the influence, the ability to shape how that wealth is used, the opportunity to honor your father's legacy by continuing the work he started. The work of moving the Sterling organization toward more legitimate operations, I said, testing my understanding. Using the money and power to do good, not just accumulate wealth. Exactly, Mr. Sterling confirmed. Jerome spent 25 years building the foundation for that transformation. He didn't live to see it completed, but you could, if you choose to. The choice. It kept coming back to that. Walk away wealthy but powerless, or step into a world of complicated power plays and questionable ethics with the chance to make it better. Neither option was simple. Both came with costs. I was only beginning to understand. I need time, I said, to think, to process, to understand what I'd actually be agreeing to. How long do I have to decide? Mr. Sterling looked at Vincent, some silent communication passing between them. The formal reading of the will is scheduled for tomorrow, Vincent said. That's when the extended family will learn about your inheritance. Once they know, the pressure will start. People will try to influence your decision, curry favor, position themselves as allies or opponents. The political maneuvering will be intense. Tomorrow, I repeated, less than 24 hours to decide the entire direction of my life. Mr. Sterling wheeled forward and took my hand gently. You don't have to decide everything tomorrow, Maya. You just have to decide whether you're in or out, whether you want a seat at the table or want to walk away. The details, the specifics of how you'll use your influence, those can evolve over time. But the fundamental choice, that needs to be made soon. For practical reasons, if nothing else. I stood up, my legs steadier than they'd been when I first arrived. Thank you for your honesty, I said to both of them, for not sugarcoating this or pretending it's simpler than it is. I appreciate that. Vincent will drive you home, Mr. Sterling said. Take the evening. Think about what you want, who you want to be. Tomorrow we'll face whatever you decide together. The drive back to my modest apartment was surreal. Vincent navigated Detroit streets in silence, giving me space to think. The city looked different now, every building potentially part of my father's hidden empire, every business possibly connected to the Sterling organization. When he pulled up outside my apartment building, the building I now knew my father owned through one of his many trusts, Vincent handed me a card. "My private number," he said, "if you need anything tonight. Questions, concerns, protection, anything at all, call me. I'll answer." "Protection?" I asked. "Am I in danger?" "Not immediate danger," Vincent said carefully. "But you need to understand, Maya, that money and power attract attention. Not everyone in the Sterling family will be happy about your existence, about your inheritance. Most will accept it, work with it, adapt. But some people don't like surprises. And you're a very significant surprise." I took the card, tucking it into my purse next to the funeral program for Jerome Washington, beloved father, secret millionaire, complicated man. "Thank you, Vincent." He nodded. "Your father was a good man, Miss Maya. Whatever you decide about the inheritance, don't let anyone tell you different. He built something real, something good, in both his worlds. That's rare." Inside my apartment, I sat in the dark for a long time just thinking. Everything I owned fit into this small space. Student loan bills on the counter, thrift store furniture, discount store shoes by the door, the ones Jasmine had mocked at the funeral. Those shoes felt like they belonged to someone else now. The girl who'd worn them to her father's funeral didn't know she was an heiress. Didn't know her dad had $42 million in property all over Detroit. Didn't know the Sterling name carried weight and power and complicated obligations. That girl was gone. I was still Maya, but everything else had shifted. My phone buzzed. A text from my mother. "Are you okay? I heard you left with those men. Call me." I stared at the text, anger rising fresh and hot. She'd known. Maybe not specifics, but enough. Enough to recognize Vincent, to understand that Dad had connections, power, a life beyond the modest performance he'd maintained. And she'd still stood silent while her family destroyed us, still chosen their approval over our dignity. Tomorrow, I'd have to face the Sterling family, face the reading of the will, the politics, the maneuvering. Tonight, I needed to decide who I wanted to be. The safe choice was walking away. Take the money, pay off my student loans, live comfortably, build a simple life free from complicated family dynamics and questionable ethics. No one would blame me. But the other choice, the harder choice, meant stepping into my father's world, using the power and influence he'd built to continue the work he'd started, moving the Sterling organization toward legitimacy, using resources to help communities, honoring his legacy by finishing what he'd begun. I thought about Dad, about the man who'd clipped coupons while secretly managing millions, who'd driven an old Honda while owning property across Detroit, who'd lived a modest life while maintaining connections to power. He'd made those choices deliberately, building something his daughter could inherit if she chose, giving me options he'd fought to create. My phone buzzed again. Another text from Mom. "Maya, please, I need to know you're safe." I picked up the phone and typed a response. "I'm fine. I'll talk to you when I'm ready. Not now." I wasn't ready to forgive her silence, wasn't ready to pretend the funeral hadn't happened, that years of standing by while her family destroyed us could be erased with concern now that she knew the truth. That could wait. Tonight, I needed to make a decision about my future. I walked to my closet and pulled out the discount store shoes. They were scuffed, cheap, exactly what Jasmine had called them. I'd bought them because they were all I could afford on my retail salary while carrying student loan debt. They represented everything my mother's family had assumed about me. Poor, unimportant, beneath their notice. Tomorrow, I'd wear something different. Tomorrow, I'd walk into the Sterling building and claim my inheritance. All of it. The money, the properties, the seat at the table, the complicated legacy my father had built. I'd step into that world with full awareness of what it meant and use every ounce of power it gave me to honor Dad's memory while building something worthy of the sacrifice he'd made. I'd been wearing those discount store shoes when my world changed. Tomorrow I'd wear them one last time as a reminder, not of humiliation, but of transformation, of the girl I'd been and the woman I was choosing to become. The choice was made. Now I just had to live with it. The next morning, I dressed carefully. Black suit from the thrift store, simple jewelry, professional but not showy, and those discount store shoes, because I wanted to remember where I'd started. Vincent picked me up at 9 a.m. sharp. His expression flickered with approval when he saw me. "Ready?" he asked. "As I'll ever be," I replied, climbing into the SUV. The Sterling building looked different in daylight, more imposing, more real. We took the private elevator to a conference room on the 15th floor. Through glass walls, I could see people already gathered, men and women in expensive suits, carrying themselves with the confidence that came from generational wealth and power. The Sterling family. My family, apparently, though they didn't know it yet. Mr. Sterling sat at the head of the table in his wheelchair, looking frail but commanding. He caught my eye when I entered and nodded slightly. Vincent guided me to a seat near Mr. Sterling. The others watched with undisguised curiosity and calculation. They knew something was happening. Someone was joining their inner circle. They just didn't know who or why yet. A lawyer I hadn't met before, distinguished-looking, carrying a leather portfolio, stood at the front of the room. "Thank you all for coming," he said, his voice carrying authority built over decades of high-stakes legal work. "We're here for the formal reading of Jerome Washington's will and the transfer of his assets to his designated heir." Murmurs rippled through the room. Jerome Washington. The name meant something to them. The nephew who'd walked away, who'd built a separate life but maintained connections. They knew of him, even if most hadn't known him well. The lawyer continued, reading legal language I half understood. Assets, properties, trusts, financial instruments. The numbers climbed, 42 million in liquid assets. Property holdings valued at another $20 million, shares in various Sterling businesses, including 30% ownership of this building. The murmurs got louder. That much money, that much property, those shares, represented serious power within the family structure. Whoever inherited this wasn't just getting wealth, they were getting influence. And Jerome Washington has designated his sole heir as the lawyer, paused for effect, his daughter, Maya Washington, present here today. Every eye in the room turned to me. I kept my face calm, channeling my father's ability to appear unremarkable while holding tremendous power. Some faces showed welcome. Others showed calculation. A few showed hostility. This was the world I'd chosen to enter. A woman in her 50s, elegant and sharp-eyed, spoke first. Jerome's daughter? We didn't even know he had a child. My father valued privacy, I said evenly, finding my voice, my confidence. He built a life separate from the Sterling organization while maintaining family connections. I'm here to honor his legacy and continue his work. Another voice, male this time, from across the table. And what work was that exactly? What does Jerome's daughter know about our businesses, our operations? I know that my father spent 25 years building financial structures that move the Sterling organization toward legitimate operations, I said, meeting his gaze directly. I know he believed in using wealth and power to strengthen communities, not just accumulate more money, and I know that he wanted someone to continue that work. I intend to be that person. Mr. Sterling's slight smile told me I'd said the right thing. The meeting continued for another 2 hours. Questions, challenges, subtle tests of my knowledge and commitment. I answered what I could honestly, admitted what I didn't know, and made it clear I was there to learn and contribute, not just collect a check. By the time it ended, I had tentative allies and definite opponents. That was fine. I hadn't expected easy acceptance. What mattered was that I had a seat at the table now, a voice in decisions, power to shape the direction of the Sterling organization in ways that honored Dad's vision. After the meeting, a few people approached me privately. The elegant woman from earlier introduced herself as Lorraine Sterling, Thomas's daughter, my father's cousin. "Your father was a good man," she said quietly. "We didn't always agree with his distance from the family, but we respected his choices. I'm glad you're here, Maya." The organization needs people who remember that power comes with responsibility. "Thank you," I said, meaning it. "I hope I can live up to that." Over the following weeks, I learned to navigate my new world. Vincent became not just a driver, but a mentor, teaching me the unspoken rules of Sterling family politics. Mr. Sterling met with me regularly, sharing stories about my father and grandmother, filling in gaps in my family history, and I began to understand the scope of what I'd inherited. Not just money and property, but connections, obligations, opportunities to make real change. My father had quietly funded scholarships for kids in Detroit neighborhoods where banks wouldn't invest, had helped start businesses that employed people others had written off, had used his financial expertise to create legal pathways for money that needed cleaning, yes, but also to build legitimate wealth that could transform communities. Now that work was mine to continue, to expand, to shape into something that honored his memory while building toward a future he'd envisioned but never saw. My mother's family eventually learned about my inheritance, not the specifics, but enough to understand they'd made a serious mistake. Aunt Patricia called, her voice artificially sweet, wanting to rebuild our relationship. Uncle Kenneth sent a letter suggesting we should all work together. Family should support family. Jasmine's text was more direct. "Congratulations on your inheritance. I hope you remember who your real family is." I didn't respond to any of them. They'd had 23 years to be family. They'd chosen mockery and cruelty instead. Now that I had power and money, their sudden interest was transparent and meaningless. But I did respond to my mother. We met for coffee, neutral territory, both of us careful. Mom looked older, smaller somehow, diminished by guilt and regret. "I'm sorry," she said without preamble, "for everything. For standing silent, for choosing them over you and your father, for not defending what I knew was true. I don't expect forgiveness. I just need you to know I understand what I did was wrong." I looked at her across the table. This woman who'd raised me, loved me in her way, but failed to protect me when it mattered most. "I'm not ready to forgive yet," I said honestly. "Maybe someday. But right now, I'm still processing everything. The lies, the secrets, the years of silence. I need time." She nodded, tears in her eyes. "Take all the time you need. I'll be here when you're ready, if you're ever ready." Months passed. I settled into my role within the Sterling organization, attending meetings, learning the businesses, building relationships with family members who were willing to work with me. I expanded Dad's scholarship programs, invested in community development projects, used my voting power to push for more legitimate operations and less reliance on gray area businesses. It was slow work, changing an organization with decades of established patterns. But I was persistent, strategic, and I had Mr. Sterling's support. The old man saw in me the legacy of his sister and his nephew, a combination of family loyalty and independent thinking that could guide the Sterling organization into its next evolution. One evening, nearly a year after Dad's funeral, I stood in the penthouse apartment that had been his secret second home. The view over Detroit was spectacular, the city lights spreading like stars across the darkness. I thought about the journey from those discount store shoes to this moment, about transformation, choice, and the complicated legacy of love and power my father had left me. My phone buzzed, a text from Vincent. "Mr. Sterling would like to see you tomorrow morning. Family meeting. Important decisions." I smiled slightly. This was my life now. Family meetings, important decisions, Power wielded carefully to honor my father's vision while building my own path forward. It wasn't simple. It would never be simple. But it was mine, chosen with full awareness and accepted with determination to use it well. I kept those discount store shoes in my closet at home, a reminder of the girl who'd stood at her father's funeral being mocked by people who didn't know who she was. That girl was gone, transformed by revelation and choice into someone who understood that power could be used for good if you had the courage to try. My father's greatest gift wasn't the $42 million he left me. It was teaching me through his example that you could move between worlds, hold power while maintaining principles, build something meaningful while protecting the people you loved. And now I was using that gift to build something worthy of his memory, something that would last. 6 months later, the Sterling family gathered again, this time in Mr. Sterling's penthouse for what he'd called an important announcement. The room was tense. Thomas Sterling didn't call family meetings lightly, and when he did, they typically meant significant changes to the organization's structure or operations. I sat beside Lorraine, who'd become a genuine ally over the past year. She caught my eye and raised an eyebrow slightly, silently asking if I knew what this was about. I shook my head. Thomas had been cryptic, even with me. When everyone had arrived, Thomas wheeled to the center of the room. His health had declined noticeably over recent months. The oxygen line was permanent now, his color poor, his energy limited. But his mind remained sharp, and his authority absolute. "You all know I've been ill," he began without preamble. "The doctors tell me I have maybe 6 months, maybe a year if I'm lucky. I'm not interested in treatments that will buy me a few more months of suffering. I've had a good life, a long life. It's time to ensure the organization continues without me." The room erupted in protests, denials, everyone talking over each other. Thomas raised a hand for silence. The gesture still commanded instant obedience. "I've made my decision about succession," he said clearly. "I've considered everyone's strengths, the organization's needs, and the direction I want the Sterling family to move in the coming decades. After much thought, I'm naming Maya Washington as my successor, with Lorraine Sterling as her second. Together, they'll guide the organization toward the vision Jerome and I discussed for years, moving our operations increasingly toward legitimate businesses while honoring our history and protecting our people." The silence was absolute. Every eye turned to me again, but this time with different calculations: shock, anger, respect, fear, all flickering across various faces. I kept my expression calm, though inside I was reeling. Thomas hadn't discussed this with me, hadn't warned me. "Maya has proven herself over this past year," Thomas continued. "She understands both the legitimate and complicated aspects of our operations. She has the strategic mind of her father, combined with fresh perspective the organization needs. And she has the courage to make hard choices while maintaining the moral compass that will keep us from losing ourselves entirely. The objections started immediately. She's too young. She doesn't have experience. She's not Sterling blood. Well, she is. But she wasn't raised in the family. She doesn't understand how things work." Thomas let them vent for several minutes before speaking again. "Everything you're saying is true," he acknowledged. "Maya is young, relatively inexperienced, and new to the family. But those aren't weaknesses. They're strengths. She's not bound by old thinking, old grudges, old ways of operating that no longer serve us. She can lead us forward without being trapped by the past. And," he added with steel in his voice, "this isn't a democracy. I'm not asking for your votes or opinions. I'm telling you how succession will proceed. If you can't accept it, you're free to sell your shares and leave the organization. But if you stay, you'll respect the leadership structure I've established." The meeting dissolved into smaller conversations after that, people clustering in groups, processing this information, forming alliances or oppositions. I sat still, trying to absorb what had just happened. Lorraine leaned close. "Did you know he was going to do this?" she asked quietly. "No," I admitted. "I thought he might give me more responsibility eventually, but this, leading the entire organization, that's not what I expected." "Welcome to the Sterling family," Lorraine said with a slight smile. "Thomas Sterling doesn't do anything halfway. If he believes in you, he'll throw you into the deep end and expect you to swim. The question is, are you ready?" I thought about my father, about the choices he'd made, the life he'd built, the legacy he'd left, about the year I'd spent learning this world, building relationships, pushing for change, about the girl in discount store shoes who'd stood at a funeral being mocked by people who didn't know her. That girl would have said no, would have run from this responsibility, this power, this burden. But I wasn't that girl anymore. "I'm ready," I told Lorraine. "I'm terrified and overwhelmed and not sure I can actually do this, but I'm ready to try." "That's all any of us can do," she replied. "Try our best and hope it's enough." Over the next weeks, Thomas worked with me intensively, transferring knowledge, introducing key contacts, explaining the intricate web of relationships and obligations that held the Sterling organization together. It was exhausting, overwhelming, and absolutely necessary. "I have one more thing to show you," Thomas said one evening, near the end of what we both knew would be one of our last private meetings. He pulled out an old photo album, its pages yellowed with age. "Your grandmother," he said, pointing to a picture of a beautiful woman with my eyes. My jawline. She was the strongest person I've ever known, survived things that would have broken lesser people, and still maintained her kindness, her integrity, her faith that people could be better than their circumstances suggested. "She would have loved you, Maya, would have been so proud." He turned more pages, showing me my father as a child, a teenager, a young man full of potential and promise. "Jerome was special," Thomas said softly. "He had a gift for seeing what something could become rather than just what it was. That's what he did for you, built a foundation that could support whatever you chose to become. Now it's your turn to see the potential in things and build them into reality." Thomas Sterling died 3 weeks later, peacefully in his sleep. The funeral was massive. Hundreds of people, from politicians to business leaders to community members whose lives had been touched by Sterling family programs and initiatives. I stood at the podium during the service and spoke about the man who'd been my great-uncle, my mentor, my friend, about his vision for the Sterling organization, his commitment to family, his belief that power should serve people rather than just accumulating for its own sake. And I made a promise, to him and to everyone gathered there, that I would honor his legacy by building the future he'd envisioned. A future where the Sterling name meant community investment, opportunity creation, and ethical business practices that proved you didn't have to choose between success and integrity. The transition wasn't smooth. Several family members left the organization, selling their shares and cutting ties rather than accept my leadership. Others stayed but made their opposition clear, questioning every decision, fighting every change. But enough people supported the new direction. Lorraine, Vincent, and key family members who believed in moving toward legitimacy. Together, we began the long work of transformation. My mother and I reconciled slowly, carefully. She'd moved to a smaller apartment, started therapy, begun the hard work of understanding why she'd chosen silence over defending her family. Our relationship would never be what it was before the funeral, before I learned about her complicity in our humiliation. But we were building something new, more honest, more careful, acknowledging hurt while working toward forgiveness. Privately? We found a quiet corner in the restaurant away from the remaining guests. Mom looked smaller somehow, diminished in ways that had nothing to do with physical size. "I'm moving," she said without preamble, "to Oregon to live near Melissa." The news shouldn't have surprised me, but it still landed with unexpected weight. "When?" I asked. "End of the month. I've already started packing." She twisted her hands in her lap. I can't stay here anymore, Maya. Everywhere I look, I'm reminded of Jerome and what I failed to do. What I failed to be. Mom, I let my family treat him like garbage for 23 years. She interrupted. I stood silent at his funeral while they mocked him. I chose their approval over his dignity and your well-being. I don't know how to live with that. Her voice broke on the last words. Can you forgive me? She asked. Someday. I'm not asking for now. I know I don't deserve it now, but maybe someday. I thought about all the years of silence, all the moments she could have stood up and chose not to, about the funeral where she'd let them destroy us without saying a word. I don't know, I said honestly. Forgiveness isn't something I can force, but I understand you did what you thought you had to do to survive. I wish you'd been stronger. I wish you'd chosen us. But I understand. She reached into her purse and pulled out an envelope worn at the edges, like it had been handled many times over the years. Your father wrote this for you 10 years ago, she said. He made me promise not to give it to you until you were older and ready to understand. I think you're ready now. After she left, I sat alone in that quiet corner and opened the letter with shaking hands. My dearest Maya Asterisk, if you're reading this, I'm gone. And I hope your mother had the wisdom to give this to you when the time was right. There are things I need you to know. Things I couldn't say while I was alive without revealing truths I wanted to protect you from. Asterisk, asterisk. I built an empire. Yes, accumulated wealth, created businesses, established connections, but none of it matters compared to the only thing I got completely right, being your father. Asterisk, asterisk. By the time you read this, you'll probably know about my real family, about the Sterling organization, about the world I kept separate from you. I made that choice deliberately, not because I was ashamed of you or ashamed of that world, but because I wanted you to have choices I never had. Asterisk. Real strength isn't about power or money, Maya. It's about knowing who you are and what you stand for, even when the world tries to tell you different. It's about making choices based on principles rather than fear. It's about using whatever resources you have to make life better for people who can't do it themselves. Asterisk, asterisk. If you choose to walk away from everything I built, I'll be proud of you. If you choose to embrace it and continue the work, I'll be proud of you. The choice is what matters. The freedom to decide your own path. Asterisk. Remember that dignity and patience are their own forms of strength. Remember that revenge is hollow, but justice is necessary. Remember that the measure of a person isn't what they accumulate, but what they give and who they protect. Asterisk, asterisk. I love you more than all the money and all the banks in all the world. You are my greatest achievement, my proudest legacy, my best self made real. Whatever you choose, whatever you become, know that I'm proud of you with all my love, that I cried in that quiet corner of the restaurant, finally grieving properly without anger or revenge or plans clouding the loss, just pure grief for the man who'd loved me unconditionally and built an empire to protect me while teaching me to be strong enough not to need it. The months that followed were full of learning and building. Vincent continued my education in both legitimate business operations and the more complex aspects of family obligations. I established the Jerome Washington Foundation, expanding the scholarship programs and community assistance initiatives Dad had funded quietly for years. Jasmine actually followed through on her promise to change. She started at one of our restaurants as assistant manager, working under Isabella, who had no patience for performance or laziness. Jasmine worked harder than I'd expected. Early mornings, late nights, learning the business from the ground up. She's got potential, Isabella told me after 3 months. If she stays humble and keeps working, she might actually build something real. Our relationship wasn't warm, probably never would be, but there was mutual respect developing, built on honest work rather than family obligation. Aunt Melissa became an unexpected mentor, calling weekly to check in and offer wisdom about navigating family complexity. The best revenge, she told me one evening, isn't destroying people who hurt you. It's building something so good that their absence from it becomes their punishment. I thought about that often. Patricia and Kenneth were largely out of my life now, dealing with their own problems while I built something meaningful with the resources Dad left me. A year after Dad's death, I sat in Mr. Sterling's study, reviewing quarterly reports and discussing family business. He listened to my ideas about moving more operations into legitimate territory, expanding community programs, making the Sterling name synonymous with community investment rather than just power and influence. You have your father's strategic mind, he observed, but your own moral compass. You question things Jerome accepted automatically. That's not weakness, Maya. That's evolution. He poured us both whiskey, a ritual we developed over months of these meetings. The family has to change with each generation, he continued. Otherwise, it becomes brittle and breaks. Your father understood that. He built the foundation that allows you to even consider the path you're proposing. Do you think it's possible? I asked. Actually moving everything legitimate with patience and strategy. Yes. He smiled slightly. Your father spent 25 years building trust and infrastructure. You have the advantage of starting from his foundation, but it will take time, years, maybe decades. As I drove home through Detroit streets, I now understood in ways I couldn't have imagined a year ago. I thought about the girl who'd stood at her father's funeral in discount store shoes, being mocked by people who didn't know who she was. That girl was gone. Not destroyed, but transformed. I'd learned that revenge could be about revelation rather than destruction. That power was most effective when applied with precision rather than fury. That dignity and patience were their own forms of strength. I was Maya Washington, daughter of Jerome Washington, heir to his empire and his values, building a legacy that honored his name while creating my own path forward. The discount store shoes that Jasmine had mocked were in my closet at home. I kept them as a reminder, not of humiliation, but of how far I'd come and who I'd become. My father's greatest gift wasn't the $42 million he left me. It was teaching me through his example that true strength meant knowing who you are and what you stand for, even when the world tried to tell you different. And now I was using that gift to build something worthy of his memory, something that would last. If this story of justice and legacy had you hooked from that first funeral insult to the final triumph, smash that like button right now. My favorite part was when those black SUVs pulled up at the cemetery and Vincent Chambers bowed to Maya while her family's faces went white. What was your favorite moment? Drop it in the comments below. Want more powerful revenge stories where the underestimated rise up and reclaim what's theirs? Subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss an upload.